So today I am joined by Maggie. Maggie is an author. She's a sociologist by training, and she has a podcast and a YouTube channel called Coffee Break with Your Soul. She actually interviewed me or had a conversation with me for her channel recently, and I thought it would be good to kind of do it the other way around as well. And I will link both the book and the interview, which will lead you right to her channel below this video. The book I have not read, but the cover is one of the best book covers I've literally ever seen. And also the title of the book is very cool. So with that introduction, this is Maggie.
Hi. I feel so strange, I have to say, because normally I'm the one used to interviewing people. So to be sort of on the other side is a bit weird. So I apologize in advance if I start asking you questions, for example, and start trying to interview you. I apologize in advance. Please stop me if it happens. It's just it's just a matter of habit.
No problem at all. No problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm really grateful. I'm really grateful to be here, and I really enjoyed our conversation for my YouTube channel, and I'm glad that I get to hang out with you again. That's brilliant.
Yeah. Yes. So tell us just a little bit about yourself, perhaps like maybe where did you grow up? Where are you from, and what was your sort of life like when you were a child, maybe?
Oh, wow. That's how far we're going. Okay. Brilliant. So I grew up in quite a small town in Poland. So this is one of the reasons why so many people have trouble sort of detecting my accent. They're a bit confused as to where I'm actually from, but I've been living in the UK for a long time. I've lived in the US for a bit as well. So my accent is pretty all over the place, I would say. So, well, I mean, I have to be really frank with you, which is that if I were to describe my childhood, sort of what defined my childhood in a way, or how I felt about my childhood is really not great. You know, it was a very unstable upbringing. I would say fear is the first feeling or emotion that I remember. And the sort of lack of security, I would say unpredictability on a sort of daily basis, right? So
wow.
This was mostly due to the fact that my dad was an alcoholic, and so if anyone lived with an addiction growing up, then they know exactly what I'm talking about. It may look different, obviously, different experiences, different to different people, but there will be many commonalities, and that unpredictability or fear are very, very common. When you grow up like this.
I can relate to that in some ways. And I think someone who grew up in a very stable situation that didn't have that, it's a little hard to understand how challenging that can be to grow up in an environment like that. And your sense of self that develops is just really a lot of times wrapped around that. Anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt. Please continue.
No. I love the sort of conversational format. I would say that I always felt different as well. I always felt, since I can remember, that I was not from here. That's the best way I can describe it. I felt like I didn't belong to this world in some way. And I even recalled a while ago an experience, which I really rarely talk about. I don't think I ever talked about it. I had an experience of seeing myself in the pram as a little child. I know, it sounds really crazy. I saw myself in the pram. So I don't know whether you call it a pram in America, maybe that's a different name, but the thing that you use to, that you put your baby in and go for a walk. Do you know what I
Oh,
mean?
yeah. Yeah, like a carriage or a stroller.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think we call it a pram, right? So I had an experience of seeing myself in it. I must have been not even
Mm.
one. So maybe no wonder that I felt like I wasn't from here or something. um, but yeah, I didn't feel like I fit in. I felt sort of as if I was here, but not quite here. That's the best way I can explain. Like I was of this world, but not in this world entirely, or the other way around, rather. And on top of that, there was a sense of not being able to really express myself fully 100% because of the situation that was going on at home, because those were different times. It wasn't as normal to as common, I would say, to openly speak about what you've been going through or what was happening in your home, right? And so I was never able to tell my friends, for example, that my dad is an alcoholic, and and that's why you can't come to play in my home because I don't know what's going to happen, right? And so in that sense, that was quite isolating. That I wasn't able to be 100% honest, and on top of that, my dad was. We had a name that was, let's say, recognized where I grew up, because my dad is an attorney, so and a really excellent one as well. So it also had to do with his reputation. Let's not talk about it. Let's not tell anyone about what's happening because that's going to ruin the reputation. As if he wasn't ruining his reputation himself anyway, in some sense. But you know what I mean? So this is probably the best way I can describe it. It does not mean that I didn't have happy moments or, that sort of thing. But, if I have to be frank and describe it sort of straight away, this is what I would say. And at the same time, around about my very, very early teenage years, I had this really vivid sense that there's more to life than meets the eye. And I refused to accept that it wasn't the case. So I think,
yeah.
And I'm speaking in hindsight, obviously, I think this is where the seeking began. And for me, I would never call it seeking. It would be more like search for meaning. What is this all about? What is this life about? Who am I really? Right? So I think that this was subconsciously, this already kicked in right there and then. And I think since then, it was a pull that I just couldn't sort of not follow. And also with that, and of course I could never ever describe it that way at the time, in the midst of that turmoil, internal and external in my life at the time, I'm sorry, I just get really emotional when I recall this, but there was this deeper knowing that there is the kind of peace available to each and every one of us that's constant, that's unshaken and untouched by any internal or external turmoil that may be happening. That's the best way I can. I mean, I can only describe it that way now. Obviously, I wouldn't, at the time, it was just a sense that this was possible. How on earth did I know that? I have no idea.
Did you have moments where you felt that as a teenager? Also, I wanted to ask you, what advice might you give somebody who might be listening to this, who at that age, like say early, mid, late teens, or even young adulthood, where there's some instinct that there's something more going on here? And I love that you said I refused to accept that there isn't. I love that, and I totally relate. But just in retrospect, what might you say to somebody who listens to what you just said and says, yes, that's exactly where I'm at?
Are you asking someone who just has this, or also is experiencing the kind of turbulent upbringing or home situation?
Well, both essentially. There's often overlap, but even some people who have stability really have that sense that there's definitely something more real available, or more true.
I have one thing to say: just follow this feeling. Honestly, like, make it the most important thing. make it priority, really. And do not ever feel inadequate or weird, or because it can come with all kinds of experiences as well. Like, for me, it was like this deep sense, but for others, there can be way more to this. There can be actual mystical, esoteric stuff happening as well, right? So I would just say, absolutely follow that feeling. Just trust it. And in a sense, I don't think if this happens to you, I don't think you actually have a choice. I think that pull is going to take you places, even if it will appear as though you are sort of meandering or maybe going off the path. You're never really off it. You really just... there's an intelligence to this pull, to this voice, to this little voice within, to that. In fact, I've had a conversation recently with someone, and we were talking about that small voice within that says that something is still missing. To me, this is exactly the same thing. To me, it's that. Let's call it inner pull. I don't know what it is. It's a mystery to me. It's amazing, but I don't even try to define it, because there's literally no point. And it's almost like dumbing it down, no matter what I say about it, feels like I'm dumbing it down. So I really think that little voice within, that pull, in particular when we sort of try to find the fulfillment or happiness in things, in stuff, in all sorts of doing of things and achieving things and everything. And even if we did some inquiry and all kinds of psychological work, that for as long as that voice is that, it just tells you it's not it. Keep on going. It's not it. Keep on going. There's such stunning intelligence to this. And it only stops when you realize that you're already whole, that who you are is already here, and there's no need to look for anything there is nothing missing, in other words. So
absolutely.
Yeah,
I love it. I think that's wonderful advice. And I'm also curious now, as you're sort of moving into your late teens and early adulthood, are you interested in academics at that point? Is that like the sort of stability in your life, or is it just how did you end up becoming maybe not a professor, or maybe you were at one point, but a sociologist?
Where do I start? I literally have no idea how I ended up there. I mean, I very rarely know how I end up in places. I just end up. It's really weird. But so I have to say that, in my family growing up, intellect was really valued. Let's put it this way, to be intelligent, to be intellectual, to study. For me, it was never a question, am I going to study for a degree? It was, what am I going to study? There was absolutely no question about not going to university and not getting master's degree. It's just completely almost impossible to imagine. And so, and I obviously had no idea what I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I had various, in reality, I was always interested in psychology, in how our minds work and, that sort of thing. But then I thought I was going to study law, to follow the tradition, the family tradition, because my sister already failed in the sense that she dropped out of law school, went to study something else. So then I thought I'll do my dad a favor and sort of please him, which is also a theme in my life, and study law. But then I realized that I want to live abroad, and what's the point of studying law? I always knew I was going to live abroad. Again, don't ask me how or why. I just knew it. And so I thought, if I go study Polish law, what's the point? And if I want to go abroad, what's going to be the use of it? So I decided to first pick political science. So I had bachelor's in political science because politics has been a very important part of my growing up. Very important. My dad, very shortly, I'm not going to go into this, but my dad was also part of a solidarity movement, which, older generation, when you're listening, might be aware of. It was basically, solidarity movement was basically fighting communism in Poland. And my dad was sort of very, very active player in that movement in our area. And he ended up even in prison for that, so for a few months. So politics was very important. I was always drawn to international politics. So because this was the only thing that made sense to me at the time, I went to study political science. And as I was studying political science, I was drawn to sociology. And even then, I didn't sort of follow it. And immediately, I still continued with... it became like a mixture because I studied kind of politically related topics, but in the context of identity. That's the best way I can describe. So I ended up doing PhD in sociology that had to do with studies of construction of identity through the media. I really don't want to go there because it's going to take us completely off track because it's a fascinating topic, but I don't think it's of interest to anyone. So this is basically how I ended up living in Scotland. It's where I ended up doing my PhD. It's where I graduated. It's where I also started to teach for a while, but then my life has completely changed 1 year where all this went away and to put me on a completely different path. So where I just basically quit the academic career altogether. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. So I knew a little bit about that, but the transition that I'm curious about now is, at what point did you become interested in spirituality as such, or in awakening as such, or non-duality, or whatever it was to you at that point? Was there a moment of interaction with someone, or a video or book that really clicked and you started like knowingly orient in that way? Or
so this is a really great question, and in 2010, I think it was 2010 or 11. I think it was 2010. I was really unhappy in my relationship. And I was just really unhappy. My personal life, was not really going that great. And on the outside, it looked amazing. I mean, I was doing PhD, I was doing all sorts of courses, you know, I was like, on the outside, my life looked really great. But on the inside, it just wasn't, it wasn't great. But I really, at the time, was so completely focused on my academics and, you know, my academic career, my PhD, my everything, that there wasn't really much time for any inquiry. And I wasn't doing it because I didn't, not because I didn't want to, it's just, it's sort of what was happening at the time. But this unhappiness kept on sort of pushing me to do this. So I would come across some self-help books and some spiritual books. Self-help books I was avoiding because in my academic circles, we were very full of ourselves, and we, you know, self-help books we would call pseudo-psychology for the masses, which is like basically lots of nonsense, right? And this actually was it. This was actually incredibly arrogant, because the academic approach would want us to actually read at least a few books in order to have a well-informed opinion. But we would just presume that this was just nonsense, you know? So no, I don't recommend that kind of attitude as an academic, not at all. So I was really avoiding sort of reading these books because, you know, they were just, I was above it all, basically, you know, as an academic. So then I came across a few, what I would call spiritual books, let's say type of like the Osho, or other sort of, I would say mostly Osho. And I was really, really frustrated reading these books because, I didn't understand the language. I had no idea what he was talking about. And it was really, really frustrating to me. And I thought, I love simplicity. It's in everything, and including language. And I really think that if knowledge is to be of any value, it has to be as simple, conveyed in the simplest way possible. And it really is possible to convey even complex concepts in a sort of simple way, so that everyone can relate, not just a few, right? So I was really frustrated with that. So I ditched those, and I was going on holiday, and all of a sudden on Amazon, this book kept on popping up, you know, like as recommendations that said, you can have what you want. I mean, you cannot really imagine a more cliche title. Self-help, you can have what you want, right? And I was just it kept on coming up and kept on coming up. And I thought, all right, then, you know, so I had a bunch of books, and I got that book, and I thought I'll read it on holiday, and let's see what all this nonsense is going to be about. And interestingly enough, when I actually sat down with that book, I will never forget that day. I really freaked out, Angela. I felt fear. I knew that if I opened this book, oh gosh, I still have chills just remembering this moment, you know. I knew that my life was not going to be the same again. And I knew...
Who's the author?
I'll tell you in a sec. Because that's also quite important. It's also quite important here. I just knew that I will be forced to look at things that I didn't want to look at. You know, it's because, you know, I am a very sort of glass half full person, sort of generally, naturally. And while it has really good aspects to it, but it would also for a long time not allow me to really face certain facts, you know, and just be in denial about certain things, or just gloss them over and find the silver linings and, you know, that sort of thing. So I said the fear, now I know that fear came from knowing that I will now have to look at the things that I didn't want to look at. And it was terrifying, you know. It was terrifying at the time. And I opened the book. And it was the beginning of what we would call inquiry. It was the beginning of inquiry. But what really, I mean, my life really has changed dramatically within a year from then. And, but it wasn't so much the content or the book, or it was more what was coming through that book, the way it was written, that I was connecting way more than the actual content. And so my curiosity, I'm a really curious person. I just constantly love to like explore things and learn things. And so of course I had to do the research on the author and find out who he was and what he was about and everything. And his name is Michael Neal. And I found his blog. I think it was a blog, and I read a few of his articles, and I was like, oh my God, this is not self-help at all. I don't have idea. I don't know what he's talking about. There's no techniques. There's no 5 steps to happiness, or, that sort of typical personal growth. And by the way, I want to make it very clear, I'm absolutely not dismissing these things, because there's place for those things. If they appear in someone's life, then they're meant to appear, and they absolutely are of value. So I want to make it clear that I'm absolutely not dismissing or downplaying the value of those things. But it was different, it was something different. He really stood out in that he was clearly pointing to something. There was also no spiritual lingo. What I call spiritual lingo, none, in the way he was talking live, but in a sort of, he was pointing you to look at it from a completely different perspective. But I didn't know what the hell it was. It was really frustrating. And this is another really, speaking about that voice, that pull that we're talking about, right? That even though, and this is really important, even though I didn't understand what he was talking about or pointing to, I stayed with it because I knew he was speaking to truth. But what it was, what that truth was, I had no idea. I just knew that he was speaking to the truth. So I went with it. Yeah. And I went with it so deeply that I ended up working with him one-on-one for a year. And it included doing what's called like a super coach academy. And so I was both coached and was becoming a coach as well. Already decided that this is what I wanted to do. Of course, that started a bit later on this journey, but first I was working with him, and then I started to train sort of in how to point people to this. And so he was working with a concept called 3 principles. So I don't really want to go into this, but basically it is a kind of a model that was built upon the knowledge, the insights, the realization that a man called Sid Banks had. He had this massive awakening, basically, and started basically speaking to people. People started, a very simple man. I think he was a welder, from what I remember. But even spiritual teachers started literally flocking to listen to him from like all over the world. But because it sounded, I suppose, too vague at the time to people, or not so much vague as woo-woo, they created this model that is called 3 principles, the principles of mind, consciousness, and thought. And they just found ways to turn his teachings into like, a way that would be more comprehensive. I don't know how to explain it, but it wasn't as woo-woo. It was way more relatable. And so Michael is basically teaching 3 principles. That's or using this model of 3 principles. And so we that's what we talked about during our weekly calls, and it was a battle because my intellect, tried to really understand what he was saying, and sort of I felt intellectually I knew what he was talking about eventually, but I felt like I wasn't really getting it. That's the best way I could describe it. And so, and at some point, I decided that as much as I appreciate intellect, because I truly believe that it's a gift that we have, my intellect, as far as this area, is not going to take me anywhere. And in fact, it's actually sort of standing in the way of me really understanding, seeing, realizing it. And so I've given up. Because it was a bit of a battle, going on. Yes, but yeah, I get it, but it was just back and forth, and at some point I've just given up. I've given up on trying to understand it. And funnily enough, just when I sort of given up, we were sitting having lunch in Arizona, Phoenix, Arizona. And we were talking about a topic that was completely unrelated to any of this. And all of a sudden, it was just, I can't even, just everything shifted for me in that moment. And even Michael, he looked at me because he said, literally my eyes just started like literally sparkling in that moment. Like he knew something was going on, because I was just like beaming. It was like light beaming from me. I mean, there was no angels descending or like music playing, all of this, none of those visuals. Do you want me to talk about what was sort of seen?
Yeah.
Yeah. I always pause because I every time I try to sort of describe it, I feel how the language is completely inadequate or just just really not. It's almost impossible to describe, but. I would say that basically I realized that we're living in a thought-created reality. That's the best way, the most sort of accurate way I can describe it. And so what happened? There's been a shift that basically allowed me to see my entire life, everything, without a thought. And
what a relief that is when that happens.
I mean, I was completely stunned by how obvious this was. And how simple it was, and how almost I don't know how to convey it, but it was unreal. It was meaning that because what followed from this or came together with it was exactly that peace of mind that I knew from the early age that was possible. And I just could not believe that I got to experience it, because I knew it was true. I knew that that peace was available to all of us at any point, anywhere. But I think I maybe doubted that I will be the one to experience it for whatever reason. I don't know. Maybe because of my intellect standing in the way, or maybe for whatever, I don't know. Not a chosen one, or something like that. Whatever I created in my head, who knows the reason? But it was everything changed. Everything changed. In a sense that, I mean, what really stunned me is that I was really, Angela, in the middle of like really a lot of turmoil in my life, personal life at the time. And literally an hour before that, part of the things that we were talking about was the stuff that was going in my life, that all the problems that I was dealing with. And an hour later, there was no problem anymore. And this is, I mean, and this has absolutely nothing to do with the denying of facts. This is not about denying that things are not working, or that it's some kind of inertia, lack of action, or sort of downplaying things or denying the reality of the situation. This has nothing to do with it. But it's it's no longer, because the narrative drops. The narrative, the thought created narrative sort of is not there. Then you actually get to have a very clear view of the situation rather than overshadowed by the narrative. And so, you know, there was a situation, I can tell you with certainty, that happened following this, that was really shocking and really painful and devastating. Or rather, had it happened before that awakening, I would be devastated. It would break me. It would break me. And here I was in that situation, dealing with it with such clarity and grace that I never thought I would be capable of. And it was, I was completely stunned by the lack of drama that I know otherwise would be there, you know. Was there pain? Yes. Was there shock? Yes. But there was such clarity of perception and sort of knowing how to navigate this situation that really was both personal and impersonal at the same time, you know. That it even stunned Michael, because when Michael called, when we had a weekly call, and I told him that he's gone quiet to the point I was like, hello, is anyone still there? And he was speechless, because I can't speak of that situation here, but you know, he got to hear what I witnessed and what was so shocking and painful, and right. And he went, when I then told him what was the situation, how I dealt with it, and then, you know, shared with him how I see it at the moment, everything. I mean, he himself went quiet. It was like, wow, you know, it's just unbelievable. He said, I think he would even, he said, even I think I would lose it in the same situation, you know, and everything. But yeah, so I would say that this was, and at the time, Angelo, I wouldn't even call it an awakening, because Michael didn't operate, there was none of this language. I didn't know about non-duality. I had no idea what it was, you know. Again, this was still because I was so put off by the spiritual lingo, so I was really not really drawn to, you know, to this. So I did not even consider myself spiritual. Honestly, I didn't consider myself spiritual. I had no idea about non-duality. I did not even call it an awakening. I was just an ordinary person that just followed that pull. This was curious enough to just continue to explore this.
I have a couple questions
Yes.
about, if you have a moment, about the two things. And again, I always gear this to anyone listening, really, but so it's in that context. But one is, without going into detail about the type of work you were doing for that year or whatever, was it essentially a form of self-inquiry, inquiring into your own beliefs, processes, thoughts, etc.? And then the second question I had is, which I think I already know the answer, but just to clarify, whatever it was that shifted or changed, whatever it was that was, let's say, realized, it definitely did not have anything to do with the intellect, meaning you didn't suddenly understand something.
Nope.
Or suddenly see it the right way, or suddenly figure something out.
No. Yes. So the answer to your second question is no. No, it definitely, absolutely not. And one of the, I think one of the, it's something that once it shifts, it doesn't go away. Right? And to me, intellect is about intellectual understanding, knowledge, perspectives, which can be shifting and, evolving and changing and coming and going. And so anything is not this, because this is not going away. It's not going anywhere. It's always here. So yes, it was not anything intellectual. But I also, if I may, can say something for anyone, in particular, if you come from a background where intellect was really glorified and put on a pedestal and everything, to not get discouraged by this. That intellect is gonna get tired of itself at some point, and it's going to come to rest, and it's fine. So even if, for a while there is a battle of the intellect, so in a sense, it's fine. It's not a problem. And
the intellect is so interesting in that it assumes that it assumes it has all the answers, and that's what's so binding about it until it's not. And so it imagines that it's preventing awakening, or it imagines that it's going to create awakening, but it just has nothing to do with it. It's just not of that domain at all.
It's not of that domain, and it must have answers, must make sense, has to be A to B, has to be clear, has to be in the box, neat and tidy, in particular where there's no space for paradoxes, because then it blows its mind, it's like, but how come, right? And which is why one of the things that I love about your book and your talks, how you point out to that there's got to be space for paradoxes. Paradoxes are part of the experience that happens, or the way we experience things. It's an intrinsic part of that experience. Paradoxes, I love them so much. I forgot your first question. Yes, the inquiry.
I was asking, just in general, was it a self-inquiry type of approach into your own, essentially your beliefs?
It was literally, so let's say we would have a call and there would be a situation in my life, let's say. So we would talk about that situation, and I would present it, from my perspective, the way I experience it. And Michael would basically offer a different view, a different angle. Right? So I would say, it was literally pointing to what's true. Really, in a sense, in different ways, because as you know, with this work, there is no one fixed approach. There is no pattern or A, B, C, that you sit with a person and you use it every single time. No, it's fresh. It's really depending on who's in front of you, where they're at, how open they are to exploring things, and so on, right? So yes, it definitely was inquiry. Yeah. Yes.
Were there parts of it that were comfortable versus uncomfortable, like seeing things outside of your more narrow perspective, perhaps?
Oh, yes.
Just in my experience, sometimes that feels like very freeing, and other times it's like you don't want to see that. You want to keep your perspective.
I mean, I'm very stubborn. So, but my curiosity trumped that stubbornness, in that there was something that he was pointing to that I was willing to let go, or at least park up, for a while, whatever I believed to be true. Mm-hmm. I think the most important, I think the most challenging parts were not so much, did not have so much to do with me, as in like with situations in the world. So you're telling me that this is all just down to thoughts, all the suffering that people are, experiencing, and so on and so on. So there were lots of situations that, and that, I'm sure you came across that, people are just bringing extreme situations from life where suffering happens, where tragedies happen, and so on. And as an example of so you're telling me that, this is just a thought, or this is just thought created, or something like that, right? So, I mean, that was 11 years ago. So I am pretty sure that I brought quite a few of those to conversation, right? Mm. And yeah. So it wasn't as much, that would not, for him as a teacher, then maybe that was uncomfortable. I don't think so. I've never seen any discomfort in him bringing anything like this up. But yeah, I think the resistance, stubbornness, the argument, it's part of this process. And on the one hand, Angelo, while it may be a sort of obstacle, the questioning, the sort of command, the sort of a bit of a battle of the intellect, but at the same time is very, very valuable. There's value to it, because I think we have to be discerning. So this is not about ditching the intellect completely.
So, not at all. And you can use the intellect to turn in on itself with precision if you're willing to feel that discomfort. And so I wouldn't consider it an obstacle at all. It's when you're uncomfortable that you're probably challenging the right beliefs. You're challenging the really fundamental ones. So I just wanted to point this out for anyone who's doing self-inquiry or doing a process where you're deconstructing your identity and your beliefs and so forth, that it's really challenging at some times, and other times.
Oh gosh, yes. I mean,
it's pretty typical.
Yes, I absolutely. I mean, we have so many deeply ingrained ideas about how life works, or who we are and why things are the way they are. That again, I think it's always important to, one of the things that I like to always say is to never compare our individual journeys to other people's journeys. Because honestly, there will be people that will have extremely hard time, letting go of those beliefs, or even forget about letting go of those beliefs, just even seeing them as beliefs, in the first place. That can be extremely difficult to some people. Some people will be more open. Some won't. There are so many moving parts and context and nuance, and our experiences, the things we've been through, how they impacted us, that will really determine what the journey is going to be like, what it's going to be like for us, you know?
So then after this shift, like you did mention that there was a very challenging situation that arose and you were like really dealt with equanimity with that. And I think that's so beautiful. And it's, man, it really is like that. But it's not always like that, like forever right after awakening. Often there's a period where it's very much the flow and the peace and just the lightness of everything. Then you really start getting into the deep internal shadow material that you just had no access to before. I don't know if that happened to you, but I would suspect, because it essentially always happens.
Thank you so much for bringing this up, because I truly believe this is not talked enough still. Not talked enough still, I would say. There's more and more talk about this, but still kind of, the bliss side of awakening, the transcendent side of awakening, sound way more appealing than this part. And I absolutely get that, but it absolutely cannot be not mentioned or pretend like it's not happening. So thank you very much for bringing this up. Well, it turns out that this was in many ways only a beginning, which is why I really call it I don't really like this term, but I don't really care about terms, but that's the best one I can pick at the moment, which is, I consider that this was my first awakening, I would say. Because then what happened years later, was massive as well. So maybe we'll get to that. But let's talk about the in between, because yes, in my case, it was quite extraordinary in a sense that this living from that, what I would only call a neutral space, lasted for over a year. And it was pure aliveness, honestly. It was, everything was still going on, there were still challenges and things happening in my life. Don't understand me wrong. In fact, it was probably one of the hardest times in my life, in terms of stuff happening externally. And yet it was the best ride at the same time, because of the way I was experiencing everything. And here's the part that I think, and I can only see it now, I had no idea about what you've just mentioned. I had no idea that shadow works. I had no idea, the stuff coming up to the surface. Like I said, I didn't even call it or see it as an awakening or anything spiritual. I just lived my life sort of, and I just wanted to, so I quit my academic career. I started learning to become what Michael was, to help people see that, right? Which is why I have a diploma from that course. It's called transformative coaching. It's called. I really don't like the word coaching. I can't stand it. I can think of it always comes like a football coach, American football coach is what I'm seeing every time I hear the word coach, which is why I'm not a fan. But it's what it's called, just the label, transformative coaching. So I became a transformative coach. I left my relationship. I moved from Scotland to London. I'm telling you, just so much changing, both sort of internally and externally in my life at the time. And so after a while, so that would be after a year, at least, year and a few months. I think it's the first time when I started to experience turmoil. I would call it internal turmoil. But I could not. And I was terrified because I assumed innocently, not out of arrogance, but really innocently, that this was that neutral state, sort of, that this is what my life is going to be like. This is how I'm going to be experiencing life for the rest of my life. And I did not experience any kind of emotional turmoil for such a long time, over a year, nothing, not even feeling low, let alone some kind of emotional turmoil. That when it gradually started happening, I thought, whoa, this first and big thought, this should not be happening. And I don't know whether we're going to get to this, because this one thought is one of the core reasons for our suffering. This one simple thought can cause so much turmoil. I'm sorry, it astounds me. It really astounds me.
That's so important.
It's massive.
It's so important and so true.
Yes, yes. And I hope
this should not be happening.
Yes, this should not. There's one thought. So I hope we're going to get to this, because I think it's so important to talk to really talk about that. So maybe we'll have time to get that. But so that was my thought. That was my thought. This should not be happening. And with that thought, I suffered. But I didn't know what to do with it, Angelo. Like, I spoke to certain people, not Michael, but I spoke to certain people from the sort of community, which I wasn't really big part of, because I'm much of a loner. And so I spoke to some people, but it's just a thought. Everybody would just say, it's just a thought. It's just a thought, And to me, Angelo, this is literally what now, years later, is the same as it's just an illusion. It's not happening. There's nobody here having turmoil, and so on and so on. This is where spiritual / non-dual terms become just empty tropes that mean absolutely nothing. They're just
they become totally problematic.
They're not only problematic; it's just noise. It's not even it's the very same words that actually express the deepest truth become just empty. It's nothing. And
so much of this is about context, the same. So for instance, the same tools or processes that help break the spell of mind identification are essentially useless and in a sense counterproductive, because they're a distraction, if you believe it, when it comes to emotion and shadow work. So I agree with you that it's completely overlooked. Well, I don't know if it's completely, but it's often overlooked, definitely misunderstood. And it's just a different movement in this whole process, but it does not feel like the first part. And there's an attachment to that clarity. You want to just feel clarity and realize, like, this is just a thought. It's not really happening, but that's just not the right tool for the job. It's time to go in deep, directly, viscerally, fully, as unguarded as you possibly can, because you don't have those filters anymore of mind identification. You don't have the coping mechanisms to just kind of go numb to things. Now you have to not only feel it, you have to be it and see that it's also part of reality.
Oh boy, was I far from what you've just described in that moment. I really, I mean, that's just beautiful what you've just said. And I have one way of looking at this, one of the many, but the truth is that when it's just a thought is experienced as truth in that moment, then there's no need to even say it. There's no need. Mm-hmm. If something is deeply known as an illusion or no separation or belief, there's no need to say it because it's experienced. And so this is a great and helpful indicator, at least it was for me. And I know that it's been since for quite a few people, that maybe some of you who are listening might find it helpful when that happens is, I honestly wish someone told me that, at the time, which is that this is one way to spot this, right? That when it's it's just the thought is experiential, then there's no need to say it. So if you have to say it, it means there's resistance. It means you're finding a way to shield yourself from an experience, or try to downplay it, or try to push it away. This is one of the very subtle ways that the resistance can show up. But of course, I was not aware of this at the time. So, it's all innocent. I mean, we're just finding our way, and trying to navigate it. In particular, if, you don't have people around who can, who can guide you through this, or who can help highlight certain things, right? So I became, Angela, like a robot for a while. It really gets me because I was unable to be with this uncomfortable emotions. I was unable to be with my turmoil, whatever was happening. And because of that, I was unable to be with the turmoil and uncomfortable emotions of other people either. And so I became like a robot, like a spiritual asshole with that as well, because I had no compassion, right? But it was innocent, even when I say asshole, I don't mean it like it was on purpose. It's just that, I was telling myself it's just a thought, and then someone would be, sharing their pain with me and be like, it's just a thought, don't worry about it. Or, okay, maybe not as exaggerated as this, but something along those lines, where really I was shielding myself from being with the pain of that person because I was not able to be with mine. And so this is really quite interesting because I'm generally naturally compassionate person. And I've always loved being there for people since I was young person. So, and here I am becoming this robot that is unable to really have the compassion, And so that really, honestly, Angela, I wouldn't be surprised if many people, including my family members, would think that I was an asshole at the time. Really, really just, even though I was, and here they knew that I was into some spiritual stuff, and yet I was this really not unpleasant person, but not one where I felt people could just relax and just be themselves in particular when they were in pain, or had some issues. Mm-hmm. So this lasted, thankfully, not that long, maybe a few months, that sort of thing. And then gradually I would somehow just snap out of it. I just on its own, but it would just kind of gradually fade away. And I would actually, for a few years, just not explore anything, not explore and not read any books, not listen to any teachers, nothing. Every once in a while I would, but I just lived life, and it was just calm. And it was, on the surface, I felt lost, because I had no idea where my life is going. What am I doing? I kept on feeling that pull toward, the things that I'm doing right now, which was my internal fight against it, and I'm speaking specifically about astrology because, honestly, if you told me even 7 years ago that I would do astrology, I would literally just laugh, and thought that you have a really funny sense of humor or something like that, because, it was just, I could not even comprehend this. So there was a lot, there was more, those years were more about absolute pull toward doing this work more deeply, and, astrology and on duality and things like that. And me sort of still resisting it, due to all sorts of, conditioning of who I should be, what my career should be given my conditioning and so on. So I would say that this lasted for quite a while until a crisis hit. There was a situation in my life that really floored me. And interestingly enough, the situation on its own wasn't really like, if I can't speak about it, but it wasn't something that on the surface you would associate with some kind of, that would lead to some kind of crisis. And yet that very situation has literally just brought to the surface everything at once, Angelo, like the abandonment issues, the shadow stuff that I was not even unwilling. I just wasn't, to be frank, I didn't even know it was there to look at, to be frank. All of this came up to the surface, and my God. Talking about massive shock that, I find myself in this place. Because again, not only that I wasn't really experiencing any much of turmoil over those years, or anything dramatic, I never expected to literally be floored like that. It was a really, it was no fun at all. And so but I also didn't feel like I had a choice in terms of not facing it. And frankly, I didn't have strength to fight it. I just had to go there. I just had to face it all. So I packed my bags and I went to Greece for a month and booked like a very simple kind of cottage-like very little place. And I went there to be with it all. And I had no idea that what would follow from that. And it was literally the most painful period in my life, and the one I'm most grateful for. That a situation seemingly not that big of a deal really made those things resurface. And it was incredible. One of the most incredible parts that really shocked me was how the very things that I judged in other people or things that they did that hurt me, things that I was judgmental of and sort of, and felt like I was always, like I was somehow the noble person. When I turned it around, I found those very same things in myself. Maybe manifested differently, maybe expressed differently, you know, but that was for the ego. This is shattering. This is earth shattering, to realize that you're not as noble as you thought you were. That you're not as righteous as you thought you were, you know, and so on. But boy, is this a gift. It's the greatest gift for all of this to start crumbling, you know, crumbling down. And long story short, really, it brought me to non-duality, really. In terms of, I started getting more, I mean, I knew of non-duality before that, but I never really explored it. Again, for the same reason, because I thought this is like only for certain people, and like they just meditate, and you know, it's, you know, I had this whole idea that awakening, which is probably why I wasn't calling what happened 11 years ago also an awakening, because I thought awakening is only reserved to a certain few, like, you know, people who meditate and have spiritual practice and dedicated to it and dress certain way and speak certain way. So nothing that was me. I was like a non-starter as far as these things, you know, because yeah, I'm a non-starter when it comes to being a spiritual person, because I speak too loud, you know, I swear, and you know, yeah. So what followed was really what I would call, and again, I really don't like calling this anything, but for the sake of the conversation, I would probably call it my second awakening or something. You know, in a sense that and honestly, words fail me here completely, because this is what we've already started to talk about a little bit, which is just one day it just became very clear, the whole isness of things. And this is like, I don't have a better word, so maybe you can help me, because you are so you're just so incredibly articulate, and you speak with such clarity. It's one of the things that I love it, but I feel like my dictionary is really just very limited to try to describe that. Isness is my favorite word. It's really the realization that things in any moment cannot be different than what they are. And with that came the seeing of the mechanism, of the entire mechanism of resistance that's at play in our lives. And Angelo, I cried. I mean, first it just was really, really quiet for a very, very long time. And actually for a few days, I didn't speak. My friends are asking what happened, and, you know, who are also on this journey. And I was saying, I don't want to talk about it. I can't talk about it at the moment, because it felt that whatever I say is a lie. I had to be quiet to honor what was seen, because that it doesn't have to be talked about. It just doesn't have to be talked about. And, you know, because I suppose that's when it really hits you how the words really can have to be held lightly, and they are really inadequate and not reliable at all, you know, as far as what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I think with what came up when you were describing that, not wanting to speak about it, like I definitely resonate. Obviously, I talk about it now, but I didn't for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And I think at least part of what plays into that is there's definitely a maturity in realization at that point that this isn't just true for me. Of course, it's true for everyone. There's nothing to fix about anyone or anything. So the moment you open your mouth using conventional language, it already sounds like there's something to fix, especially when you're talking about even this stuff we're talking about. So for me, I had such a tremendous, I guess, respect for the process itself, whatever the heck it is, that who am I to ever even say a word about it? And at the same time, I can see the stickiness of concepts and ideas.
Yes.
And so, yeah, you're just kind of in awe of everything and the simplicity of everything. And at the same time, like, it's really okay for everyone, even if they don't know it is. It was okay for me, even when I didn't feel like it was okay. And yeah, it really is. Words really do fail here. I might use the term equanimity, meaning there's just not a separation energetically between what is and in a sense what you want, or what you perceive. What you perceive to be the correct way things could be. There's only one way. It's just this, and it's simple. And with that, there can also be varying degrees of perceptual shifts with that, where not only is it clear that whatever's happening is the only thing that could ever possibly be happening, and there's no reason to take a position in regards to that at all, and there's a deep peace in that, and also the underlying apparatus that even makes it appear as if there's something else out there anywhere is also an illusion. And so there's this visual, auditory, sensory intimacy that's indescribable.
Yes.
That's what I would call non-duality, truly.
Yes. And, the implications, it's almost, and I can only speak in hindsight and believe it because, for me, the way I see it, only ever sharing my perspective, is that awakening is not an arrival point. It's not an end point. And so the journey, I used to despise this word, but now I don't care. I actually think it's a beautiful word. The journey continues. There's an unfolding and deepening for sure. And, I'm still continuing to really see the implications in my daily life of that seeing, right? Because it's, first of all, I would say the difference, in case that might be sort of helpful, is that with that first awakening, there was still a sense of self that was not my thoughts, but there was still a sense of self there. And that's a huge difference between, then and now. But believe me, if that's all I saw at the time, that we live in that created reality, that would be plenty. Thank you very much. I'll take that, that would be plenty. And so this is one of the reasons why I wrote the book. The entire book is about living in a created reality, but I wrote it sort of literally with the intention of writing it for people who literally have no interest in awakening, where there's no spiritual lingo, and just taking them through just day-to-day stuff that happens to all of us to see how that reality is created via thought, right? So that it's like that. But with this other, because with the first awakening, there was like a massive shift in perception, the way perceiving of the reality, which never went away. With the other awakening, or the second, or whatever, there was a shift in being. Like something just dropped in the body. I really have very difficult time explaining the actual the physiological, the energetic side to it. So maybe it would be great if you could sort of talk about it. But I have trouble explaining what that means. But it really is not just a shift in perception. It's also a shift in just, it's such a lame example, but I only recently with a friend, when we were having a chat, I came up with it. It's like spiritual awakenings to me are like sort of like software updates. Whereas this is like a whole new software. So you're literally operating, you're operating from a completely different place. And so the implications, the biggest implication really, and that was the seeing of there was a seeing of the mechanism of resistance that we all that when we argue with reality, when we resist what is, that mechanism kicks in, and it's going to kick in differently for different people. Yeah. And it's literally that mechanism comes from this one thought that we talked about. This should not be happening, including our ideas of an awakened person, how the life of an awakened person should be like. So literally this mechanism is, which is why, again, we always can only ever speak of a direct experience of a specific person, not talk in general terms, because then there is no place for nuance and context and like details like this, because my mechanism of resistance would be different to yours, to, people who are listening, it will be subtle. Very subtle. It will be different. Even when we think we're no longer resisting and are so open to everything that happens, it's still going to show up, that resistance. But it will be so subtle that it will be almost impossible to spot. And so this mechanism was seen of basically how this one thought, this should not be happening, or I don't want this to be happening, or I prefer something else to happen. That mechanism kicks in, and all the tricks and maneuvers, psychological, spiritual, all kinds of mechanisms will start churning. And the energy, this is what really broke my heart in a way. When I saw the energy that mechanism requires, psychological, physical, physiological, nervous system, how much energy this mechanism of resistance is taking up, uses to resist what is. I mean, I can feel it in my entire, like I have chills going throughout but just because it's undescribable when so I suppose that mechanism, once it was seen, it collapsed. It sort of collapsed. And so I found myself literally for a while in between worlds. It's like I remember how the other software functioned, but I'm now operating in a different software. So it's a whole new territory. I'm not used to operating with this new software, but I remember what it was like. But I still remember. So there's every conditioned mechanism or anything that comes up, it comes up more like a memory or an echo of what was, but it's no longer, that mechanism is, that there's a memory of the mechanism, but that mechanism can no longer kick in and resist.
Yes, totally.
I'm exhausted.
Yeah, I totally get that.
I'm sorry. This is my best shot at trying to explain
It's very hard to talk about this, but you're doing a good job. I mean, it's a very difficult thing to talk about, and it is a little different for everyone, and there's nuances. But as things clarify, it becomes pretty darn clear how all this functions and what it, just the mere appearances of it all. But I might say that with a first shift or a first awakening or Kensho, there's a very significant, important, and fundamental shift in identity. But later on, at some point, and as you rightly pointed out, the experience of identity is still there. You might have gone from being a thought-based person to some kind of universal consciousness that needs no definition or name, and you feel it, but there's still an identity mechanism functioning. When the later shift is more like you're shifting from identity. You're shifting out of identity. The identity mechanism stops largely, and we see what identification is, that selfing actually is. And as you describe, a lot of it is reactivity. And it's interesting because it can hide really well after awakening. And for many, many people that they just really want to resist the deeper stuff, it will hide because it's very conditions based. So there'll be times when you just feel very, very free, and you can ignore that background self that's there, that's still applying struggle and pushing and pulling, but it's doing it subtly. And then when the conditions are right for it, you can get quite reactive and then just conveniently overlook that. So that reactivity selfing mechanism is just as you said, it requires so much energy, but it also, because we're still identifying with it to some degree, we keep putting the energy and not realizing that there's nothing to struggle against. Struggle is struggling against struggle. That's all that's happening. But you got to find a way to break it long enough, or stop it long enough, or inquire deep enough, or accept enough that you really give it a reset, give it an opportunity to reset. And when it resets, it's exactly like that. Like, you can see the operating system, but it's not you. And there's no need to believe in it or buy into it, or especially to push it, to put energy and will into it, because that very quickly turns into massive amounts of struggle, And so it's just looking from a different perspective, but it's really no perspective in one sense. It's not the perspective of an individual. It's just an intimate knowing, an intimate, clear knowing and seeing.
Yeah, there seems to be also and again, maybe you can talk, I would love you to talk about that if you can, that energetic part, which also manifests in sort of everything. There's no sense of separation in sort of like, even now that I'm sitting, it's all sort of fluid and sort of I'm sorry, I feel that when it comes to the sort of nitty gritty, just like I always sort of love to talk more sort of life and things like that, rather than just conceptual descriptions, because words really fail me. But can you talk about a little bit about that energetic shift that comes with that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting, and I think this has become so. Any individual going through this will it's just intuitively obvious what's what, but they may not have words for it, and they may not care to have words for it. But I think from my experience of just being exposed to so many people, what I've seen is the kind of two shifts that we're talking about. That they often come together, but they don't always, and sometimes one comes before the other. And one of them is the sense of a subject and an object, the sense of being someone here and there's stuff over there, in the most basic way, not with any kind of resistance or overt cognitive identifying, but the actual just moment-to-moment experience that can just drop out. So there's no subject-object experience anymore. There's just like one doing, one arising, one appearing of everything as it is. And you still have the operating system to know that's a microphone and that's a piece of paper, and like you still know what the symbology is, but it's actually not like that. Fundamentally, you experience fundamentally it's not that way.
Yes.
And with that, the sense of even having a body gets very light.
Oh my God,
like,
yes, and it's like literally
in the relative sense.
Yeah, this is the weirdest thing. Like literally, it doesn't happen as powerfully all the time, absolutely not, but a lot, like for example, I will listen to my friend on the phone, and all there's nothing there other than voice, There's literally nothing there. There's no hair. There's no like me. There's just, or I'm traveling and I feel like literally things are changing in my perception, but this has not gone on a plane or gone anywhere. It's just it's just, it's just, so on that energetic level, this is really bizarre at the beginning, just kind of, not, but bizarre in a good way. I'm so sorry I interrupted.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's all very, I think you're describing it very well. And it's, the other thing that's so fascinating about it is when this insight is clear, and the insight almost like realizes itself, again, the sense of self apart from anything is sort of gone at that point, experientially in the sense fields. Another very fascinating thing about it is the implications of it that start to clarify over time, and that is near and far don't make sense anymore. So although the conditions allow me to see you and see this right now and this room, there's also a deep knowing that this and the rest of the solar system and the entire galaxy and all of the physical matter in the universe are also not closer or farther. It's not like that. It's just that the conditions allow us to see it or not see it in this moment or experience it. But there's that kind of intimacy with this, and that deepens more and more until the sound of that voice in the conversation is not only not you or them, and it's just this vivid, luminous sound that's profound and intimate. It's also the whole entire universe expressing that right now. The whole universe is in that sound, and that sound is the culmination of the entire universe. It sounds mystical and bizarre or something, but it's not. It's really obvious at some point. It just gets more and more and more clear and simple, and there's this innocence with it too. There's such an innocence to this spontaneity of this vivid experience, vivid appearance. Yeah.
Oh, I love how you talk about it. I don't know why that just popped in my head. I really don't know, so I'm going to say it because it popped in. It's one of the things that I thought following that first awakening and following that year and so of living from that neutral space was that later on, even when I finally started reading up on things like awakening or non-duality, that awakening means no disturbing emotions, no anything unpleasant or uncomfortable. And I don't know why I felt like saying this, but honestly, I think I've been seeing this as one of the massive pitfalls on this journey for many people, that innocently, but often I believe led to believe as well, unfortunately, that an awakened person is basically a person that is Zen 24/7, is literally never feeling any emotions, and certainly not deeply sort of detached from life in some way, and frankly, if something like this if awakening is projected and portrayed that way, it doesn't look like this from where I'm looking, in that sense that
I feel you. I totally get it.
Yeah, in a sense that I think what it does, I think it's inevitable, and what we do, and we all do that, I believe, at some point, at some stage, that we really listen to different ideas and different teachers and different experiences. And it's great. I think the richness, the availability of it is brilliant, absolutely brilliant, that we actually can choose a teacher that resonates with us more, and rather than that one. And we have those choices. I think it's incredible. But I think what tends to happen, and like I said, I don't think anyone's immune to this, is that at some point we might start collecting these ideas and build up an image of what awakening is supposed to look like, or what it's going to look like afterwards. Yeah. And I really, this is very innocent. I believe it's very innocent. And I always say, just no, please don't do that, because it's actually standing in a way of meeting what is, because the mind goes to how we think it should be. And so, and then, like I said, for me, if I were to try to kind of get into maybe not the call, but what this looks like to me, and what I believe my entire work is about, really, is just to help people embrace their humanness, and in particular the parts that are challenging and not so pretty to look at, and the shameful parts, and all of this is to really, of course I do it differently to you, and there will be different sort of approaches as to how we do that and everything, but this is at the core of my work too. And it doesn't matter whether the person is awakened, not awakened, interested in awakening, not interested in awakening. We are not immune to these things like shadow and, conditioning and stuff like that. And it's really, really humbling to remember that just because we had spiritual experiences or had an awakening, not immune to humanness, not immune, it's just that the way that humanness is experienced is fundamentally different, because when we realize that isness of things, or the true nature, then there's really only now, and in some ways I said awakening is like a beginning, it's only now there's a space to meet everything fully. Only really now, because it's now met from a completely different place. And so, in particular, those paths that are not that comfortable, but now they are met with curiosity and with compassion, and it's rather than with that narrative of how things should be and could be and so on. And if anything, to me, awakening does not lead to some kind of inertia or checking out from life. It's actually you're becoming more and more intimate with life. In many ways, even more engaged with life.
I agree.
Right? Rather than the opposite, which I always thought, it's part of why I was avoiding spirituality or these sort of conversations or language, because I thought, I don't want to be detached from reality, I want to be alive and sort of, it's, yeah, wouldn't you say that it's like literally the opposite to what we might think?
It ends up being that for sure. Yeah, I really trust. What I do is I really feel into where people are, and I trust where they are, and I help them to trust where they are. And some people do have an instinct for a while of going into the cave and the sort of sacredness of solitude, and if that's their instinct, and it doesn't feel too much like bypassing or avoidance, then so be it. And there's a time for it, for sure. So for me, this whole sort of process, a lot of it is to do with timing and just being really authentic with yourself and sincere about, why am I doing what I'm doing? What does it mean at this point? But to the point that you're describing, certainly after that significant shift in identity, and you start to really feel the heavy stuff coming up from down deep, that's not the time to talk yourself into finding a way to avoid it or bypass it or anything like that. It drags out the inevitable, and the inevitable is you're going to integrate it. You're gonna go in. You have to go in. Really finally the way out is in. There's no other way.
Yeah.
And that definitely becomes super important. Yeah. So there are, you could say, integrative and disintegrative aspects to this process, just as there are integrative and disintegrative aspects to reality at the quantum level and at the cosmic level. So I think there is some importance to the relevance of where someone is,
Absolutely.
the stage that they're at. And it also depends on the person. Some people are just chronically emotionally enmeshed and they're always in dramatic and heavy emotional situations and relationship after relationship, and they may need to pull back from that a little bit and just give themselves space,
of course,
because their conditioning is so over engaged. And then of course there are other people who they're just too distanced from life. They're too in their head. They're too, and for someone like that, it's like, okay, well, let's touch into the emotion spectrum some, even before awakening. Sometimes when it just becomes intellectualized, it's like, okay, well, let's touch deeper into your suffering. Let's get in contact with your suffering, so you have something to put behind the self-inquiry.
Yeah.
So for me, it's really just a matter of where people are and trusting them and having them trust you through your own vulnerability, and making a rapport. We're talking kind of about maybe more about teaching now, but yeah, I like to use almost nature as a model. Nature has different seasons, and there are different there's seasons for going dormant, and there are seasons for sprouting, and then there are seasons for celebration of aliveness, and there's seasons for letting things start to fall away again, and yeah.
Which is why I say it so often that I'm literally fed up of hearing myself say it, to again not compare our journeys with journeys of other people, because honestly there's so many moving parts and context and nuance and the stuff that happened to us and how it impacted us and what's going on at the moment, that really and even not dismiss, we really, on my website I have this quote. Let me see if I can just grab it really quickly, because I don't want to spoil it, so I just want to have a look at it. It's by Pema Chodron, and she said, everything that shows up in your mandala as being just life, right? That's me interpreting here right now, is a vehicle for your awakening. From this point of view, awakening is right at your fingertips continually. I love it so much because really we can have ideas about how awakening is supposed to happen, when it's supposed to happen, and so on. And then there is this intelligence of life, and natural sort of unfolding that honestly, it really trumps all our ideas. And often we actually get to see the intelligence of it in hindsight when we look back, right? And so really it's not to dismiss, whether it's even, so many of us came into spirituality via personal growth stuff, or we read a self-help book, right? Yep. None of these things are to be dismissed, or dumbed down, because with this wave of people being interested in awakening, I completely understand that. But I also see a tendency of sort of looking down on people then who do personal growth or who do astrology or who do, right, that sort of thing. And really, it's easy to say that, everything just is, and just chill. Yeah. Like when this is your experience, fantastic. But let us not forget what it was like, and the things that we struggle with, and how actually a self-help book at certain point, that one sentence that we read in that book was an opening, right? And even with my work, Angelo, I work with so many different people. It's fascinating, but some of them experienced an awakening, some of them didn't, some of them have absolutely no interest. And we sit with the birth chart, because I basically use birth chart analysis as a way to make what unconscious conscious. So to bring the conditioning to the surface and see how it manifests in life, or the shadow, right? And honestly, when I work with someone who's completely not interested in, say, awakening, believe me, the moment they see their conditioning for the first time, how it manifests, how it impacts their relationships, their communication, and all sorts of things, the ripple effect of that, but they get out for this moment, and they're not in it, they're out, and when there's openness and courage often to see that or see their shadow, I have chills every time, because these are little awakenings. This is exactly what Pema Chodron is talking about, when the awakening is in your fingertips, and you never know what's going to be that first opening, that first moment where, what is this about? Right? Where all of a sudden everything looks so personal, and here, maybe for the first time in your life, you have this sort of bird's eye view. And then if the person is open, then we can explore what that is. What was looking at it, right?
Yeah.
Fantastic. But if all they get out of this work, for example, is just seeing that conditioning for the first time, and then just by the virtue of having an awareness of it, their behavior changes, right? So, I mean, isn't that incredible?
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that miraculous in of
Absolutely.
itself?
Yeah.
It's that, I mean, I cannot tell you, Angela, how honored I am that I get to witness this. That, I'm sorry. It's that I can play this.
They're lucky to have you.
That I can play this little part in, that they welcome me into their world, and believe me, the stuff that we discuss, the shadow, the often things that we're ashamed of, guilty of, and everything. It's not for faint-hearted, really. But there is the space of curiosity and compassion in which we can do that, and I am in awe of some of these people's courage to do that and to lay bare, really, and it's those things. I'm telling you, it's a conversation with a person, a line in a book, a sentence heard listening to a video. None of these things are to be dismissed, because they can be such beautiful openings when we're not even aware, in those moments. So
I agree.
yeah, it's a fascinating journey.
Follow the breadcrumbs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I think we're sort of towards the end of time. Thank you for your time. I will put links underneath this video when I release it on YouTube you want it to be to your book and your YouTube channel. And what about your practice? Do you have openings still, or are you full?
You're suggesting the links. Oh, that's lovely. Yes, I mean, we can add, I have a few things happening. I have the YouTube channel that you were a guest on, Coffee Break with Your Soul. So if people would like to subscribe. In fact, I want to say thank you so much, because honestly, I got so many messages and comments after our last conversation, and how people enjoyed the conversation that we had on my channel. And I got quite a few people actually subscribing to my channel as a result of this conversation. So I'm very, very grateful. Thank you very much. And so yes, people can subscribe to the YouTube channel. They can subscribe to my newsletter as well, the same name, Coffee Break with Your Soul. I can send you a link, so it'll be easier. So that would be great. And yes, and visit my website if you're interested in working one-on-one. Yeah.
I think it would be hugely beneficial for anyone who's interested in generally self-inquiry, just because I know you, we've had these conversations, but you also approach it with so much heart and compassion that I would be more than happy to refer anyone to you. So we'll put those links there, and I would encourage anyone who wants to work directly with somebody on a one-on-one basis with some sort of self-inquiry type stuff, that would probably be
Thank you very much. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you. It's been great joy, because to be on the other side, and being asked questions, I'm not used to it. So I had no idea what we are going to talk about, but I just trusted you completely, and I just really respect you and your work, and I'm so grateful that you're there doing this work. And I feel a lot of love and appreciation in my heart right now. Yeah. For you.
I feel the same. I'm glad you're doing it. Some people, interestingly, wake up, are deeply realized, and don't necessarily overtly teach anything about it or work in a facilitating way. I think most do that I know, but you tend towards that at some point, because what else are you going to do? Like, it just makes sense. But some people don't. And so it always, anyone who's sort of comes from this place of just really integrated realization, I'm always just pleased that you're willing to share with people. And thanks again for coming on this journey with us for the last 2 hours. And it was wonderful. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And we'll see you soon.
Take care. Bye.